terms of they're shooting for a location event where everybody's socially distanced, but they can have it in person. I think that's probably what they're trying to go for. There is a statement at the bottom that says, you know, it depends on the local codes and what's going on at the time. But they do have the different locations here. So I think that you can share this with your family and, you know, put it on your calendar, these different dates. Do you want me to talk about the difference between these events real quick? Like what happens at all of them? Or do you already know? Okay, yeah. I never know what they tell you in other places and what they don't, so I can fill you in a little bit. Okay, so the honors banquet on April 13th is a dinner. And typically what happens is you're allowed to invite two people, and it's a sit down dinner. And then after dinner, it's a cap and gown event, and they announce the top 25. Well, all the honor graduates get their stoles, and they announce the top 25 and the valedictorian and the salutatorian at that time. So that's what happens there. I don't know to what extent they're going to have to modify that. I'm just telling you what usually happens. None of this happened last year because it just all got scrubbed pretty much. I mean, there was a virtual graduation, but that was about it. Okay, so then the Scholarship Awards Assembly is at the PAC, hopefully, and at that event, they will reveal the winners of the various local scholarships. In about a week or two, I expect that the counselors will want to come in and talk to the seniors, or we'll set aside some time for you to meet with the counselors about how you do the local scholarships. I talk about this a lot in my independent studies class, but local scholarships are cash money in your bank. So other scholarships that you might get from your institution or, you know, your financial aid, you don't ever get control of that money. That money goes right into your account. So local scholarships can really help you. You know, like a lot of local organizations and the schools, the elementary schools give scholarships, and you know, all that stuff that can really add up to help you pay for things like transportation, books, laptop, you know, other things like that. So when that opens, I'll make sure that you know that that's available. Usually it's the month of March that they do those local scholarship applications. And then the other scholarships that you might want to do, there are tons of them. I'm making the students in my independent studies class do 5 to 8 scholarship applications in 6 weeks. So there are lots of them. If you want, I can share some links with you. If you let me know that you're interested, I can share some links in the Google Classroom that could get you started with scholarships if you haven't done that already. So there's the scholarships that your school will offer you, your university and all that stuff. Okay, I will. And then that just goes into your account. And then there's the scholarship money where people are like, okay, we know it's expensive to transition to college, so apply for all this money and you can just have it in a bank account. Actually had a student from last year come and visit my independent studies class, and she's at UT. It was Aitza Roque, if you know her. And she came and she said she was so happy that she had that scholarship money, that additional scholarship money, because she didn't have to ask her parents for anything the whole first semester. She had her own account. She wasn't accountable to her parents. Her parents weren't like, oh, how are you spending that money that we sent you? Because she had her own bank account. And so at that assembly on May 11th is when they announce the winners of all those local scholarships. But you can apply for tons of scholarships. I mean, I've had students who got $25,000 in scholarships, and they had a bank account and they could use it as they saw fit. And, you know, they didn't really have to ask their parents for any money. Okay, moving on. Panoramic picture, they're going to try to do that at Bobby Lackey Stadium. I don't really know how that's going to work. It's probably a cap and gown picture, but more details on these things later. STC graduation, if you are graduating with your associate's degree through the dual enrollment program, that graduation is May. I've heard conflicting things. I don't know if you all have heard conflicting things. I've heard that they're going to try to have it in person, that it's going to be in person, and I've also heard that it's virtual. I do know that the graduation for dual enrollment is separate from the graduation for the other students at STC, because they always want us to, put on our regalia and come to it, but it's always like during school or something. But that's the date, May 14th. Also on May 14th in the evening is a senior parade. We did this last year, and I guess they're continuing it again this year. It's just usually, I don't know the details about it, but I'm imagining that it's like the one last year where the seniors kind of like decorated their cars, and then all the faculty members and staff kind of like, cheered everybody as they went by and that sort of thing. So I'm assuming that that's going to happen. It's the equivalent of, I don't know if you remember when you were sophomores, the last day that the seniors are on campus, they do a little, superstar parade through the campus. And so that's the equivalent of that. And then graduation night is May 28th. So if you're just joining us, I'm just going through these dates because they announced on Sunday some important senior dates for the springtime and graduation type events. And you might want to take note of that in your calendar, let your mom know what's going on. And to whatever extent they can, I think they want to have in-person events, socially distanced. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it's possible that it might be limited, the number of people that you can bring to some events because of social distancing. So they'll announce that as we get closer to the dates, but I'm anticipating that. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Are there any questions about these dates of these events? I was sharing this with my classes yesterday, and I happen to have a number of like the student council and senior class officers in some of my classes, and they were saying that there are other things that are underway that just need to get approved, like special things for the seniors to celebrate their accomplishment and graduation. Yay! And so there are other things that are coming. So do keep an eye on your email, keep your eye on the Twitter feed. I try to retweet stuff that I see like this. So, and bring it up if there's, major thing coming up that you might want to know about. So I will try to do that. I will also make a note to link the scholarships. I was talking about scholarships, those of you who just joined us, and like the difference between institutional scholarships and local scholarships and independent scholarships. And in my independent studies class, I'm making them do a certain number of scholarships per 6 weeks. And so I have a whole bunch of resources that you can use to apply for scholarships. Everyone that you apply for, you don't get. So the more you apply for, the more chances you have of accomplishing that. If you want to, I can do a seminar on scholarships. Maybe I should make a video or something, like how to efficiently apply to many scholarships, because there are tips and things. You can find stuff on the internet too. I'm not the only person who knows about scholarships, but I can walk you through that. If you're interested in that, put a note in the chat or email me later and I'll send you even more info. But I'll post later today some scholarship things. There are scholarships for juniors sometimes. I don't know if juniors know that. So keep an eye out. Don't just assume that it's only for the seniors. Sometimes there are scholarships for juniors. So I'll post some stuff in Google Classroom a little later on today. All right, looks like we might as well get a start today. Oh, there's Dimitri. Okay. Good morning, Dimitri. Congratulations. Did you set a new record in swimming? I thought I saw that you did. No comment? Okay. I thought that you did.
Wait, what? Did you say something to me? I couldn't hear.
Yeah, I did. Did you set a new record in swimming?
Oh, yeah. I said 3.
3? What were they?
The 2 relays with the guys, and then my individual for breaststroke.
Congratulations. That's awesome. And you guys are headed to what,
Thank you.
regionals or what this week or next week?
Yeah, we made it to regionals, and then from there we'll see if we can go to state.
That's awesome. Well, good luck. We're super proud of you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to switch over to good old Blackboard here and go to the course content. We're starting this week on the new unit, the 16th and 17th centuries. There was a lot of background reading for today. I'm going to tell you right now, I know this is being recorded, but off the record, there's not a lot on the midterm or the final exam about the historical background. Like there's not specific questions about the things that you read in the background from the textbook or the info that they have here on the Blackboard page. So what they do is the questions will ask you to write a little bit about how the literature reflected the time or how something changed from this period to this period, like the English language or ideas about poetry, things like that. So all that background, I think, I think you don't have to toil over it. It will be helpful to know the basics, and I'll try to fit in as much historical stuff when we're going through our material as I can that you would need to know. But I mean, I think if you skim over it, if you've had a European history course, all that stuff is really going to supplement what you need to know about the background for that stuff. So I know I say stuff a lot. So I don't know. I know that the assignment was to read, you know, a bunch of pages in the textbook and a little thing here. The 16th century. I think a lot of it was probably either more detail than you needed to know or stuff that you already did know. We're talking about the Renaissance. We're talking about a time in English history when there was a vibrancy and an explosion in creativity in mainly in art and writing, in literature. In music, not so much. Even though the Italian Renaissance included music, the English Renaissance isn't that big on a big boom in music. But they go into a lot of detail about the monarchs and who was king and all of the back and forth wars between the different factions. That stuff is not going to come up on a midterm. I'm just going to tell you straight up. So if you skim over that basic stuff, I think you'll be fine. You know, jot down a few notes, but you don't have to know that, you know, the years that James II was the king or anything like that. This isn't a history class. It's just that we have to understand history to understand the literature. So I just think that textbook happens to go into too much detail about it. But there are some pages here to familiarize yourself with. And today we're going to talk about, I have a little PowerPoint for you about the difference between poetry in medieval times and in Renaissance so that you can see the growth of the language and ideas about poetry. We have 3 poems that you should have looked at for today and a study guide. So we'll go through that stuff today. Thursday, we have Intro to Shakespeare specifically. That you should probably read. It's just a few pages. Oh no, wait. Yeah, just a few pages. And then there are 5 sonnets that you need to read. I'm working on finishing up an anatomy of a sonnet, like sort of overview. I'll show you that to you before we go today because it will help you with that reading for Thursday. But all right, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the history stuff. I feel like you can skim through the background and I'll touch on things that are important as we go on through these pieces. The main piece for this unit is Othello. We're going to do a little bit of poetry this week, and then next week we'll be starting that Shakespearean drama, and we're going to read the whole thing. So it's pretty much an act per class period. I think I combined acts 3 and 4 because they're short. But the good news is that Othello is one of the shortest of the Shakespearean dramas, so I don't think it'd be too taxing for you. All right, I want to go through this background on Renaissance literature. You do have access, if I give you a PowerPoint or anything like that, It will be down here under other materials, so you can access it later if you need to. But it's always I always just put extra stuff that I do down here under other materials. But let me go through Renaissance literature. So first, I want to review the basics of medieval literature because we just finished that up and it's a comparison, right? One of the things that you will need to be able to do on the exam is you'll need to be able to explain the difference between periods, or you might need to look at a piece and look at its qualities and determine that that is a piece of romantic literature or that is a piece of Renaissance literature. So understanding the qualities will help you to do that. So I want to talk about the basic qualities that we saw in medieval literature already, and then we'll move forward and see how those change in the Renaissance period. Oops, that completely threw me off. Okay, I meant to click down here. Okay, so when we talk about the qualities of medieval literature, we're talking about the forms like heroic legends, like Beowulf and Gawain. Gawain's also a romance, also frame tale and religious allegory. A lot of that is based on, um, superior humans and religion. And we see topics like morality, social status, biblical stories, and chivalry with medieval literature. All that stuff is encompassed in what we've already read in the last unit. We also see an emphasis on the power of God. We saw that with Beowulf and the insertion of the Christian concepts into that text. The fact that somebody would be God ordained, a lot of times kings or even Beowulf says if it's God ordained or if I'm God ordained, then this will happen. Bible centered literature, chivalry as a moral code, and also this idea of a cosmic reward and punishment. If you are a good person, then you'll be rewarded in heaven, like we see in the Pardoner's Tale. If you're a bad person, you better repent or you're going to end up, dying and being punished. So there's a lot of that cosmic reward. I would extend that even to the idea of fate, like we see in the Wife of Bath's tale. The idea that that knight gets taken down, from his arrogance and ultimately is punished and has to learn to, be more equal with other people and understand status in a better way. Now, the Renaissance is a renaissance not just in the arts, but also in the concept of ideas. Humanism is the overpowering concept in the Renaissance time period in England. Humanism is just the shift to the idea that a human has the power to create their own life. Really pervading through the Middle Ages was the idea that everything was God ordained, everything was dependent. And I could see how they would think that. I mean, the caste system alone teaches you that if your dad's a farmer, you're going to be a farmer, your children are going to be farmers. That's just how it goes. There's no concept of, well, if I work really hard, I can make some money and, you know, grow in my status and make a better life for my children. That idea didn't really exist in the Middle Ages much. So now in the Renaissance, there's this idea that a human can create their own opportunities. A human being can make choices and protect their own future. And therefore, destiny is not only dependent on God or fate, but also in man. Now, psychologically, that does a couple of things, right? The idea, it's easy to be a victim if you believe in, well, it's easy to be a victim anyway, but it's if you believe in a society where everything that happens is controlled like a puppet master, then you would not feel like you had control over your own life. And it would be easier to say, oh, the gods hate me, or, well, it wasn't meant to be, or, that kind of thing, instead of saying, I wonder what I can do about this situation. I wonder how I can make things better for myself. It would be, so it's an enlightenment of the idea that a human being has the power to improve. And that's the idea of humanism. It's not a really difficult concept. It's something that we sort of take for granted, I think. even in America, that idea is instilled in the concept of the American dream, right? If you work hard enough, then you can, it's limitless what you can accomplish. So we celebrate that. And so this is the dawn of that in in English literature and history. So there is one of the, I think it's discussion number 4 is about humanism. So it's important to understand that concept as we go through the Renaissance literature. So as we're thinking about the power of man, we start to see that in the Renaissance, reading takes on a new power. If you're trying to improve yourself and give yourself opportunities, then you might read in order to educate yourself for those opportunities. So reading becomes less for religious reasons. Edification just means like learning. Um, and more for personal pleasure. There's a renewed interest in the classics, vocabulary, learning about a variety of different topics, and not just the Bible, not just religious texts. So there's more variety of genres and topics that we see in the Renaissance. It's sort of an explosion of variance. And now we have a wide variety of types of texts and the acceptance of those texts. In the Middle Ages, if you're not reading the Bible, what's wrong with you? We talked about the taboo topics that are present in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So there's this expansion of varieties of genres and topics. Writing also takes on a different scope. Now there's more personal expression. Writers think less about religion and society and more about their personal emotions and feelings. So there's an influx of personal emotions in poetry and in literature, so you can look for that. Also, there's the development of complex ideas. The writing becomes a lot more complex with more metaphor and deeper conceptual presentations of ideas. The exploration of man's abilities, what man is capable of, his potential, all of that is being explored in literature at the time. And you can see why, because of humanism. So it's kind of important to think of, as we're reading these pieces, how does humanism coming out in that piece? There's also in the Renaissance more of an enjoyment of now. There's a real although it's present in the Middle Ages literature, I feel like in the Renaissance there is a greater idea of mortality. It's present in Middle Ages, and we see it in The Pardoner's Tale and in Beowulf. There's this idea of mortality, but you can't do anything about it. In Renaissance literature, because of humanism, there's the idea that, okay, well, if we're mortal and we're going to die, let's enjoy our lives and maybe try to leave something for the future. So there's more dancing and theater and, love expressions in the literature. And there's also a fear of death that is also present. I think you probably know this from the textbook or from your study of history, but just remember that when we talk about the English Renaissance, we're roughly 100 years down the line from the Italian Renaissance. The Renaissance occurred in, as we use the capital Italian Renaissance, in the 15th century in Italy. And so it took a while for that to translate into the English location. It had to travel. People had to figure out that there's this burgeoning of painting, sculpture, architecture, that kind of thing, and say, hey, well, that could influence us. So there's an influence, and we could see it directly in sonnets. There are Italian sonnets that Petrarch was writing in the 1400s, and then the English create the English sonnet and literally piggyback off of that idea 100 years later as they're writing their poetry. So just keep in mind that when we talk about Renaissance in England, it's a little bit of an adjusted time period compared to the Italian Renaissance. Okay, so here's just a side-by-side quality comparison on poetry, because we're really only going to read poetry and drama of the Renaissance. Those are the two main features. There were essays, there were essayists, but our focus is going to be on the poetry this week and the drama starting next week. So there's a list here of the qualities of medieval English poetry that we have already seen. In the English Renaissance poetry, we start to see some of these qualities. And I think discussion number 3 is going to ask you to write about the qualities of Renaissance poetry in the pieces that we're reading this week. That discussion isn't due until next week, but I think this is a good slide to either do a screenshot or take some notes or something, because they're going to ask you, well, I'm going to ask you to look at the poetry that we've studied this week and apply the qualities of Renaissance poetry to it, to those pieces. And that's what you'll be writing about. So just a heads up on that. So there are more complex rhythmic structures. We've seen that with sonnets that we looked at in the first semester. There are a lot of rules about how the poetry has to play out, the rhyme schemes, the metrical patterns, the quatrains and the couplets and all of that stuff. So there's more complex structures. There's an elevation of the language. So this is a real opportunity for English to come into its own as a legitimate language, because we talked about how in the Middle Ages, you know, Chaucer writing in English was a surprising thing because English was sort of a, you know, bastard language. But there's an elevation in the English Renaissance of English, and so that's important to note. You could look for examples of, you know, language in terms of metaphor, complexity of ideas, and that kind of thing. There's a more standardized spelling that happens in the Renaissance. There's still not standardized spelling. I mean, there's not a dictionary until, you know, another 300 years, but spelling becomes a little bit more standardized, and so it's a little bit easier to read. Complex comparisons, I talked about that. There's a certain type of metaphor that we see in Renaissance literature for the first time called a conceit. And it's spelled just like the word conceit, like conceited. And I'll probably talk about this maybe Thursday when we do the Shakespearean sonnets. But a conceit is a type of metaphor that is an extended metaphor with a really, really deep comparison. Focus on personal emotions and private circumstances. We didn't really see that, except maybe we could say in the Wife of Bath's prologue. But poetry that's specifically designed to express personal emotions and private things is new in the English Renaissance. Pastoral and nature topics. Pastoral means like out in the country, you know, images of sheep on the hillside. You should have seen that in the shepherd poems that you prepared for today. Nature topics, we didn't really have that at all in medieval literature. It was basically about, you know, kings and monsters, and then, you know, social status and people mainly. But there's a focus and an expansion into the ideas of these nature topics in Renaissance literature. And there's the almost obsessive idea of mortality versus immortality. In medieval times, the only immortality that exists is like Beowulf pursues being legendary, or, you know, the afterlife. In Renaissance poetry, there's an idea of we're all mortal, but we can make our mark on the world, and especially through literature. There's a number of poems that we'll read that, even the one for today, the Spenser poem, is about, you know, maybe if our love has to die because we have to die, maybe we can make it immortal by writing it in a poem. And well, guess what? Here we are still reading it and they're still dead. So the idea is that there's a way to be immortal, and there's a power in that as a human being, and that goes back to humanism. So there's just a side by side there. I would really use this in discussion number 3. And you have access to this slideshow in the Blackboard if you need it. Okay, any questions on any of that background stuff? I wanted to talk a little bit about the poems for today. I'm looking in the chat. I'm looking in the chat. Don't see anything. Okay. Edmund Spencer, there were 3 poems for today then, and a study guide. So I thought I would go through the poems a little bit, talk about them generally. Feel free to ask me questions if you want. And then we'll go through the study guide if there are any questions from the study guide, and then that's pretty much it. Oh, I want to talk about the assignment for Thursday, but then that's it. Okay, so Sonnet 75 is a sonnet in, well, Spencer had his own style of sonnet. So it's not an English sonnet strictly, it's a lot like an English sonnet, but you'll notice that the rhyme scheme is different. In an English sonnet, it goes A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G. This is just a refresher from the first semester. But in a Spencerian sonnet, we have interlocking rhyme. So you can see that it goes A, strand, B, away, A, hand, B, pray. And then instead of switching in an English sonnet, this would be a C. It continues with the B. So then you have B and C, B, and C. So whatever is the second line here becomes the first line of rhyme in the next quatrain, right? So that's just a little variant of the Spencerian sonnet. You still do have the couplet at the end. It's just that the rhyme scheme is a little bit different. But still we have the quatrains. You can see how they're even marked off with indentions here. There are these first 4 lines, these 4 lines, this section, and then the couplet. So this poem, if you read it, maybe you had to look, I don't know, maybe the way they have it in the book is kind of old fashioned. Maybe you looked up a more modern translation of this poem. I think that's perfectly valid thing to do. But it's about the elements of time taking its toll on a couple. And there's this personal pronoun I, which we talked about as a quality of Renaissance poetry. And the speaker is talking about how he wrote his lover's name or his beloved's name on the sand. He says strand here, but whenever you see the little superscript, you have to look over here and see they're kind of filling you in a little bit on the notes there, or footnote. So, we've all been to the beach where you write your name in the sand and then the waves come and, as the tide comes in or out, kind of washes that away. And that metaphor, that conceit, is used throughout the poem, or at least for the first half of it. And so it's a metaphor for the transience of life, right? You can write your name on the sand, but nature is going to erase it. Time is going to erase it. And that's the truth about life. All these things that we do and we worry about, and all these things that we focus on in our lives, will be irrelevant 100 years from now, because we won't be here. So there's that concept of immortality. I know that's a little depressing. But luckily in Renaissance poetry, they tend to end with a positive element. It's a little more, bright outlook than the bleak qualities in the Middle Ages. So he talks about how I wrote, my girlfriend's name, my wife's name, my beloved, he doesn't say, just her name, in the sand, and the waves washed it away. So I wrote it again, and it's about human beings' attempt to make their stamp on life and make themselves known in this world, and how nature will eventually take that away. So he writes it again, and they have a conversation. The woman that he's speaking to, the intended audience, says, why are you trying to do that? That's pointless. There's just going to always be another wave, and you'll die before the waves stop washing up on the shore. And she says, matter of fact, the love that we have for each other is mortal. And he says, no, maybe it seems that way, but maybe I can come up with a way that we can be immortal. And I will write you down in this poem. So he says, my verse, your virtues rare shall eternize. And you'll see this in some Shakespearean sonnets. You'll see this in a lot of places in Renaissance literature, the power of the pen, the power of literature to remain after the writers of those literature pieces are gone. And it is a way to be immortal. I mean, here we are still reading Spenser, we're still reading Shakespeare, we're still looking at those things. So he was right. He's not alive. Their love is not alive any longer, but he immortalized it here in this piece. And so with that, we can know that our love won't completely die. There'll be a memory of it. And it's kind of like the idea that when someone passes away, we can at least have the memories of that person. We have pictures, we have notes that they've written us, or you know different keepsakes and things that we can keep behind the memory of that person. So that's the idea in this sonnet. I don't see any questions on this sonnet, so I'll go to the next poem. The next one that you were supposed to read is a really good example of the pastoral, because we have a shepherd. So pastoral is a term that we use for music, for art, and for poetry. Pastoral just means like the country life. The idea that somebody who tends sheep has a simpler life than somebody who, you know, has a bustling job in the city. And so it's idealized, the idea that living, out in nature and having the job of tending sheep is, sounds kind of nice if you have a lot of complexities going on in your life. And so it's an idealized life. Let me read this one because this poem is echoed in the third one that you were supposed to read for today, right? So this poem goes like this, the passionate shepherd to his love. So that tells you who's speaking. The speaker is a passionate shepherd and he's speaking to a woman. And it's all about how he's trying to get her to come and live with him in, this idyllic location. Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove that valleys, groves, hills, and fields, woods or steepy mountain yields. And we will sit upon the rocks, seeing the shepherds feed their flocks by shallow rivers, to whose falls melodious birds sing madrigals. And I will make thee beds of roses and 1,000 fragrant posies, a cap of flowers and a kirtle embroidered all with leaves of myrtle, a gown made of the finest wool, which from our pretty lambs we pull, fair lined slippers for the cold with buckles of the purest gold, a belt of straw and ivy buds with coral clasps and amber studs. And if these pleasures may thee move, come live with me and be my love. The shepherd swains shall dance and sing for thy delight each May morning. If these delights thy mind may move, then live with me and be my love. So you can see he's making his case, right? He's saying, come live with me in this perfect world. We will make our clothes from the purest wool from our own sheep. And, we'll spend our days sitting on the rocks looking at the sheep grazing on the hill, and everything seems very beautiful. The birds will sing. It's very relaxing. It's a life of, relaxation. And he doesn't talk about who's going to feed the lambs, who's working the farm, who's getting the wool off. Like all that hard work is just put aside because a pastoral is like an ideal. And he makes a pretty good case. I mean, I gotta say, with the stress going on in our world today, I think it'd be pretty cool to go live with in the wilderness, watching some sheep. Seems like you'd have a peaceful life. He talks about how they'll make their clothes and so on and so forth. And so this is a good example of a pastoral. I don't see any questions about this one either in the chat. So I want to go to the one that's probably even more fun than this one. This one's pretty simple. Maybe there's a couple words you'd have to look up, but the text had some words glossed there. The fun one is Sir Walter Raleigh's reply, because Marlowe's poem, here's a little backstory. Marlowe's poem was probably circulating before it ever got published. I think it was published after he died. He died young. He was in a sword fight or something. I don't know, he died in a violent way. So his idea of this pastoral, come live with me and be my love, got passed around, and Sir Walter Raleigh had his response to it. And he imagines what the woman would say back. A nymph is a like imaginary creature in the woods. There are wood nymphs and sea nymphs and, you know, tree nymphs and all that stuff. And they're like fairies. So this is where he imagines the reply, and it's a pastoral, but you can tell that it's a satire of Marlowe's pastoral. So it's the nymph's reply to the shepherd. If all the world and love were young, and truth in every shepherd's tongue, these pretty pleasures might me move to live with thee and be thy love. Time drives the flocks from field to fold, when rivers rage and rocks grow cold, and Philomel becometh dumb, the rest complains of cares to come. The flowers do fade, and wanton fields to wayward winter reckoning yields. A honey tongue, a heart of gall, is fancy's spring, but sorrow's fall. Thy gowns, thy shoes, thy beds of roses, thy cap, thy kirtle, and thy posies, soon break, soon wither, soon forgotten, in folly ripe, in reason rotten. Thy belt of straw and ivy buds, thy coral clasps and amber studs, all these in me no means can move to come to thee and be thy love. But could youth last and love still breed, had joys no date, nor age no need, then these delights my mind might move to live with thee and be my love. So do you see in this example, as I was talking about how romantic poetry Renaissance poetry tends to have a positive ending. The rest of this poem is not positive, right? This woman that he's trying to convince says, that sounds nice, but I'm a realistic lady. And all that stuff is not really how it's going to be. And not only that, but it will only be temporary. And so she says, I'm not moved to come and be your love. So she rejects him in this poem. And so this is kind of like a satire response to Marlowe's perfect pastoral. But it does end on a positive tone, because she says, if we could be young forever, like in your poem, if love could always be true, if we could be joyful all our lives and not grow old and, you know, have arthritis, then maybe I would come and be your love. But basically you're not being realistic, and I'm not doing it. So, you know, she rejects him in this, but you do have that ending part. Questions on this poem? I'm only hinting a little bit at how these poems demonstrate the Renaissance qualities of poetry, because that's going to be your job in discussion number 3. So you'll have these 3 poems and also the Shakespeare sonnets that we're doing on Thursday as your material to work with for discussion number 3. But I've given you some little ideas here and there, and then you also have that slide. What was it? This slide. So when we're reading the poetry also for Thursday, be thinking about how you can see these Renaissance qualities in the poems. I'm giving you little hints here and there, but if I lay it all out, then that's all I'm going to see in the responses, and I want you guys to do the thinking on that. So, all right, if there aren't any questions on that, I want to talk about the reading assignment for, oh wait, the study guide. The study guide for poetry, I put all of the stuff for this week and next week on the same study guide. Basically what you should do, I'm sure you already looked through this, but For each poem, you should be able to explain how these elements are working. We just had the first 3 today. These other 5 sonnets all are for Thursday. So, but you know, sonnets are short. So are there any other questions, like any of these 7 that you want me to talk about with the poems for today? All right, well, we can bring them up if we need to, but here are the sonnets. They're listed also on the calendar, and they're also listed in the Blackboard readings section over here. So with the page numbers in your PDF. And here's the study guide again right here. So on Thursday, you're going to read these 5. Be prepared, you know, do a 1, 2, 3 analysis, at least a preliminary one. Have some ideas from the study guide about those 5 sonnets. Here are the things to look for specifically. I'm making I have one more slide to do on it, but I'm making a slide that I'm calling the anatomy of a sonnet, of a Shakespearean sonnet, just to refresh your memory about sonnets, since we have 5 of them for Thursday. So that's already linked here under other materials. I just have one more slide to do on it. So it's right here if that helps you when you're preparing for your sonnets on Thursday. I don't see anything in the chat. So the sonnets are listed here. Also, I'll begin talking about Othello and give you some background. On purpose, I did not make a discussion for this weekend. I've already graded discussion number 1. I finished those this weekend. I'll be looking at discussion number 2 through this week and this weekend. I kind of wanted to, I don't know, I feel like if there's literally a break because it's a 3-day weekend, you know, let's make it so there's a break. It doesn't seem to me like that's the time to heap up extra work. But you know, if you find yourself with some time, it might be prudent to start looking at the reading for next week. The pages are here for Othello. I think I put them in here. Yeah. So just as a heads up, and I'll talk about this on Thursday a little bit too, in case you wanted to get started, you know, use the fact that we don't have a discussion to do this week to kind of get going on next week and get a little bit ahead of for yourself. Othello is not in the PDF version of the textbook. It is in the physical textbook. It's just that the PDF is like edition 8. This textbook is edition 9. And they changed around the Shakespearean dramas that are in there. So this is a different PDF. It's a PDF of the textbook, but it's the 10th edition. So you won't find it in the PDF we've been using. You'll find Othello in this link right here, but you'll also see the pages. So you can kind of say, oh, well, if I can read Act 1 is, you know, like, you know, 9 pages, I can get that done over the weekend. So I'm ahead of myself for Tuesday. I have to sit there Monday night trying to read, you know, Act 1. So I'm trying to think of the best way that I can give you opportunities to do that. And then Act 2 is Thursday that same week. And Act 2 is pages 11 to 19. And then the following week, we have Act 3 and 4 grouped up together, and that's a little bit longer of a reading assignment. It's a fairly short play, but anyway, I'm just suggesting that you might want to use this time to get ahead since you don't have that discussion number 3 until the 12th. I'm trying to think what else I was going to tell you today. That's a lot. If you came in late, you might want to go back and watch the video of the beginning of this class period. I was talking a lot about the upcoming events for seniors that were released Monday or Sunday night. So there's some background on that. I will go ahead and put up some information about scholarships so that you can get started on those. And I'll see about doing some sort of seminar or making a video or something that will help you be efficient and apply to as many scholarships as possible as you're getting ready to prepare for, you know, the fall at college, seniors. They're going to show up in Google Classroom. All right. I don't see any questions. I don't see any hands raised. Is everybody awake? I don't know. This is the kind of morning where it's nice to just pull the covers over your head again and dive back down. But I appreciate that you all are here, and I know that it's not easy to have that 8 o'clock wake up call. So I'm going to go ahead and sign out then, and I will see you on Thursday for Shakespeare's sonnets. And I don't know, I'll probably keep the same background. This is Shakespeare's birthplace. So I thought I'd put that in for today. Okay, I hope that you all have a good day, enjoy the weather, and I will see you back on Thursday, okay? Bye. Let me know if
Thank
anything comes up
you.
that you need help with.